Michael, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the problem that we see in the marketplace today with the sea of red problem. And the sea of red problem, of course, is when we have multiple unrelated alerts showing up in a monitoring platform that floods out the value that a customer could be getting from that platform. Can you take us through the problem that you've seen in the field?
Yeah, well, actually, I want to take us back a step, sort of historically, how you get to the situation that we're in. So if you go back in time, originally we had this idea of alerting where vendors would create, oftentimes just a simple light that gave you an indication that there was a problem on a system. And as the systems before it became more complex, you start to get more of these lights. But originally, they were all structured in a way that by the vendor for their own software, usually single systems, maybe multiple components, but single systems. So it was something that we could kind of get our arms around and we could manage. That started to change as you started to get more components. So services were no longer monolithic. They were started to be made up by a lot of different vendor pieces working together. But even at that point, you had a lot of information, a lot of monitoring information that was coming in, but you could still kind of get your arms around it because the environments that you were dealing with were really fairly static. What's happened over the last little while is you've had this compounding of issues that have started to drive that in an unmanageable way. So where you may have had hundreds of events coming in, at least when the world was static, the NOC guy could get his arms around that, and the senior NOC guy, the guys that have been there for a while, could start to recognize patterns. But we've had a lot of things that have started to change now. First of those was the introduction of things like virtualization and containers. So the devices now didn't always exist consistently. There was a lot more dynamicism in whether the devices were around. You had a lot more ephemeral effects. And the problem there is that now you couldn't, as a human, get your arms around necessarily always understanding what the environment looked like. And as you started to move into things like microservices, you also started to get more and more and more components, all of which were producing a ton of their own events. And you compound that even more as you move forward with, a rise in merger and acquisition. So now, not only do you have a complex ephemeral environment, but you're pulling in multiple environments and sticking them together, and layer on Internet of Things, layer on mobile, and you are increasing the amount of information coming in, not just, in multiples of itself, but in orders of magnitude. So at the end, you have, as you said, the sea of red, which is essentially just an overwhelming flow of data, and the useful information that's in that data gets lost on a human who's trying to track it. And we see this at large organizations. Actually, it doesn't even need to be large organizations of all sizes, but some of the ones that sort of stick out in my mind are some of the large financial services that we've worked with, where they had, in order to cover all the different components that they needed to monitor, they had on the order of 100 different systems that were out instrumenting various different parts of the environment, all of them dumping information to a console, and really it not being usable at all because the NOC operators were completely overwhelmed by the volume of data coming in.
What's the practical impact of the sea of red problem on a NOC operator?
Well, there's twofold. There's one that I would say the business primarily is concerned about, and that extends the time to resolve problems, even picking out problems in the first place, identifying what is something that is an issue versus what's just noise. So there's sort of those technical sides, and then there's I'll call it a personal side to it, where the NOC operators are working in a untenable environment from a workload point of view, and from the effects that it has on them personally. So it's exhausting, it is demotivating, it is challenging in a lot of different ways. And like I said, some of those affect the company directly, some of them affect the operators directly, all of them affect the bottom line and the ability to deal with service assurance.
We're really seeing a renaissance right now in the marketplace around monitoring tools and the rise of some very interesting cloud-based monitoring and management platforms. And this is certainly a big step forward versus some of the legacy tools that are out there. In your opinion, is just making the move to a new monitoring platform enough, or do we need more and better tooling for dealing with the sea of red problem?
So I agree, and will immediately acknowledge that there are a lot of really good tools out in the environment, the next gen monitoring tools. The thing, and they get around a lot of problems that we dealt with in the past, the ability to be agile and to quickly be able to ingest different kinds of data, to normalize that data into a consistent data flow. The challenge is that all of that is still producing a lot of alerting. That doesn't actually address the sea of red problem. In fact, in some cases, it actually exacerbates the problem because it makes it that much easier to grab more data and put that in front of the operator. So while you're becoming better at collecting data and instrumenting devices and services, you're actually just exacerbating the problem of being able to identify when there's problems that occur. And for that reason, 100% agree. There's absolutely a need for something at the next level, something that you do with that flow of data that's coming in, something that you can use to translate from data into information that you can actually act on operationally.
Let's bring Fred into the conversation. Fred, just going off the back of that question, what do you see as that next level technology that we should be investigating as practitioners in the monitoring space?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. I think, Michael, you said it quite well. There's like a producer-consumer relationship here. And the more you invest in the tools, the monitoring observability tools to produce better data, this is great. This is part of the problem. But you also need operational workflows that help you consume that data. The analogy I like to use is email. Imagine if you received 100,000 emails a day, very good emails, right? So it's not the problem necessarily about there's something wrong with them, they're missing or they're erroneous or they're spam, but you have no system to process those and sort those and triage those and decide, well, how do I do that? That would be a stressful way to live. So if you're going to attack your IT options, kind of function, attack isn't the right word. If you're going to try to improve things, you need to produce better data and really work through your systems of how you consume it. So for me, the first way I want to kind of think about consuming alerts is like, well, what happens next? We generate all these alerts. Well, what happened? Which ones were processed? Which ones were not? How many were duplicate? How many pointed to a real issue that required my attention versus, not a real issue? And, you talk about the sea of red. I think that's a great sort of metaphor. There's just a sea of data out there. And it's not so much a quality of the data necessarily it's a problem, although it might be. It's a volume, it's the granularity. It's no longer like that little light on the box in the data center that says red or not red. It is much, much more granular than that. At the area of this particular part of this microservices-based architecture running on this particular container at this moment in time. So the way I think about it is you need to invest in, let me get my arms around it. Let me see the magnitude and the scope of the sea of red. I want to quantify it, I want to visualize it, and I want to analyze it. And just human nature is I need to break it down into some manageable components such that some human can start to figure out how to make it better. So give me the ability to drill down by team or service or monitoring source, et cetera. Let me help filter out all of the different sort of duplications. Let me normalize that so that my science logic and my Splunk and my Datadog and my New Relic alerts all call the thing that I'm responsible for managing, whether it's a server or an application, they all call it exactly the same. And you start to like unify all of that data into a consumable format. I guess that's the simplest way to put it. Start with unifying your data into consumable formats. And then there's a bunch of really exciting things you can do about how to get better and better and more efficient about, operating on that data.
Fred, what do you see as the practical outcomes for the guy in the NOC who has to stare at the screen all day when you're leveraging that kind of technology stack?
So, here's what we see from our customers. There was a before Big Panda and an after Big Panda kind of moment for them. And before, it's shift work of alert processing is how they frequently describe it. We didn't have time to go to the bathroom before. We didn't have time to grab a cup of coffee. We didn't have time to make anything better ever. We spent 100% of our time processing alerts because one of those alerts might be a really important issue. So you kind of repeat. Every day is the same and it doesn't really ever get better. And then after they adopt Big Panda, several things start to change. So one thing is that they'll reduce the volume, right? If you were processing 10,000 alerts in a day, and we can reduce by, let's say, 90%, well, now you're down to 1,000 alerts. You've literally shrunk the problem without losing anything. You've shrunk the problem by 90%. Great, that's a start. One of the big benefits you get from that reduction is time back. Okay, I have 90% of my time back to get a little bit more curious about, well, what else is duplicative and repetitive? And people start to, work on correlations. Like, okay, I'm getting 3 alerts every time this kind of event happens. Maybe I can correlate that into one incident. And there's another level of reduction that comes from that. So they go from 90% to maybe like 98, 99% reduction of the volume of things that you're asking your team to process. The next thing that kind of comes from that is, okay, the way I process these items, these incidents that tend to be pretty repetitive. Every time I see this particular incident, I always go check out this other system to see what's going on there. Or I always go check these log files. Or there's like these little sort of micro parts of the algorithm that has been ingrained in the operations team from a kind of institutional knowledge perspective. Well, every time we see that happen, we say, well, why don't you automate that? Like take that little part of your manual response and find a way to automate that so that you get better and better escalations. The ideal scenario is that when you open up a ticket, you've already done all of the predictable, repetitive, automatable components in terms of root cause and checking the latest changes and checking other parts of the system and infrastructure, and it's all right there at your fingertips. So if you're working out of an ITSM tool, which many operations teams are, you'll see an impact of literally like 98% reduction of things to process, going from alerts to like tickets, and then a much richer set of information sitting in that ticket, much higher quality. And just the sort of organizational improvement and quality of life of improvement is just tremendous from that. All of a sudden, like I said before, they get really curious, they get proactive, they start going upstream to fix problems at their source and not just band-aiding the same problems over and over again because they never had time to do anything else.
Michael, maybe I'll ask this next one to you. We frequently work with CISOs and CIOs on, for want of a better term, digital transformation initiatives. And we hear from those folks that they're under tremendous pressure these days to really get cost containment in order. We've been told time and again, we've spent a lot of money on our tools and we're trying to show value and we just can't. What, in your opinion, are the measures and metrics that we would use to prove out that some AIOps investment is a worthwhile one for the environment, for the company?
It's a good question. There are so many, I would say, that you're able to utilize here. I mean, there's the obvious ones around being able to understand or to more quickly resolve issues, to cut down on the the time it takes to get yourself out of trouble when you are in trouble, to be able to identify that and then resolve it. But as we've alluded to a couple of times here already, there's also metrics around the sort of the wealth or the health and well-being of the people that are in the NOC, cutting down on the turnover there. Big Panda in particular has some interesting ability to give you insight into the quality of the data as well that you're collecting, and identify if there are data sources that are feeding in that potentially some data sources are maybe giving you more useful information that you're able to, that contribute more effectively to the workflows that Fred was talking about, and others that aren't. And that allows you to make some decisions, potentially measure around making some decisions on whether you need all of those information sources, or whether you can be a little more streamlined on that front as well. So there's a whole bunch of different places that you can measure that.
Fred, same question to you. What's on your CIO scorecard if you're trying to prove the value of an investment like Big Panda?
So I try to start like as far left as possible, right? So when people think about AIOps, they immediately think Minority Report, right? I'm going to predict and resolve incidents before they've ever occurred. And like, yes is the answer, and you're going to get there. We don't really start there, right? It doesn't start with that. It starts with much more pragmatic, but also simpler sort of tasks, like what's the quality of your alerts? You're spending how many millions of dollars across 50 different tools that are generating event data. What's the quality of them? Like, what percentage are action, what are low quality, high quality, et cetera? Number one. And number two, what percentage of your total incidents, of your outages, breakages, issues, were detected proactively? And if you are going to go kind of on a path towards like that Minority Report sort of function, you better start with like really good detection of incidents proactively. If you can get to a point of 90% of issues are detected internally through your monitoring and event management systems, well, that's fantastic. That's in a good state. But if you are starting off at 10, 20%, probably invest your time there. And then, as Michael said, once you kind of got your arms around that, now it is about MTTX of some form, mean time to know that there was an issue, to know where it was, to pinpoint it, to root cause it, to remediate it. There's lots of different ways of sort of slicing up the parts of the response function or the operations function. But I think one of the biggest items, one of the sort of missing things is, well, what was the quality of the data? Start by putting metrics around the quality of that data, making sure that you're not blind or overwhelmed with data and therefore not able to respond. If you do that, then the MTTX components come a bit more naturally.
Michael, why is now the time to consider an investment in some sort of AIOps technology, and in particular, Big Panda?
Well, so we have never been in a situation, as I talked about earlier, we've never been in a situation where we have more data coming in. We've never been in a situation where there is more pressure on organizations from the point of view of the services that they're providing, of making sure that those are top quality. It's, there was a time when, as long as you had done the digital transformation, that put you ahead of your competitors. Really, we're past that now. Everyone is in this place, so the margins for error that you have are much smaller. The opportunities or the opportunities you have in front of you are really dependent on your ability to execute. And using things like AIOps, Big Panda AIOps allows you to be able to be much more efficient in that execution, to be much more analytical in how you look at things, understanding, as Fred said, being able to understand the quality of your data, and then be able to action that. Now is the time to be doing that, because those are the things that give you the edge. It's not enough just to kind of play the game. You have to be playing at the top level.
Fred, why Big Panda and why now?
If I could add on top of that, thank you. Look, there's never a better time to start getting more efficient and better at your operational function. And it is clear that this is a machine level problem. The data is so overwhelming that this is a big data problem. It requires machine learning, it requires AI to assist the operations teams. There's no better time to do that than now. That's part of it. And it's driven by digital transformation. It's driven by, cloud migration and the increasing velocity and just the innovation that the organization is sort of driving to. One of the things that talking to a few customers recently has really kind of like opened my eyes a little bit. I was talking to a CTO of a large health insurance company last week, in fact, and he said that it's like, okay, operations teams, like, it's kind of a thankless job, right? If everything is working, I don't think about my operations teams. When something's broken, well, then I think about my operations teams and I think about how could they do better and how can I help them be more efficient, et cetera. And that's kind of about it. They don't have like this other value add to the rest of the organization, because it's not only the operations team that's under stress, it's all of the engineering and application development teams that are trying to innovate and do things better and more efficiently. And they're typically the ones that are adding all of the telemetry and deploying the monitoring and observability tools to try to understand more about their application so that when something does break, they know where to go look and they've got data right there at their fingertips. So there's this really interesting sort of value exchange that I think could happen here if you use an AIOps platform, which is you can, as an operations team, start to show kind of like the digital exhaust trail of your application. This is your app. These are all the events that are produced by it. And here's what happens next. This is what gets dropped. This is what's, produced. These are the duplicates. It's sort of like quality control around that. And if you do that, let's say you have 4 different engineering teams, you kind of show the data to those 4 different engineering teams. That's data they've never had before. That's this really interesting value add to them, number one. And number two, there's this sort of transparency thing that happens, right? You're not saying your application is sending bad alerts. You're just holding up a mirror. This is how you're performing. This is how you look. By the way, here's how your peers look. That tends to have a very nice effect in terms of when somebody sees that data, they automatically like, okay, well, I can make that a little bit better. Let me, I didn't realize I was, sending alerts in triplicate in many different cases that aren't really useful for anyone. That's costing us money. It's costing us toil. It's preventing the operations teams from being able to catch the more important ones, and they start making things better. So this isn't all on the the IT ops sort of function to get better here. I think there's a nice value exchange. This is a joint exercise between the engineering team and the operations teams, and start with like kind of seeing and measuring the impact of the sea of red, and then the solution starts to present itself a little bit. Well, how do I make it better from there?
Fred, let me just play the devil's advocate here for a moment. I mean, I could spend a lot of time just improving what I've got. Why bother asking for budget and asking for all the things that go into making a new purchase and investing in AI ops? I could just improve what I have and get some benefit out of that.
It's a fair question. And frankly, I've had that same question from many a customer. Here's what other big Panda customers have said. And it's that like you can make a certain amount of progress on the producer side of things, producing, more and better, higher quality event data, but without completing the handshake and tying that into your operations teams and getting really good at sort of optimizing the consumption of that data, you might be going down the wrong path. You might be doing work that you don't need to do, or it's in the wrong priority order, et cetera. This is not really a, should I have better monitoring or should I have better operations? The answer is, well, you need both. And you will do both more efficiently from an economic perspective as well as a human perspective, and with much better results if you kind of parallelize these. So look, if you have literally no monitoring, well, yeah, you should probably instrument your product. Start with that. But the moment you start to get, a decent handle around that, it's time to start getting proactive around that data and figuring out how you'll use that data to transform your ops team. And I would say start there and parallelize that. We tend to find different ways just from the value added from the AIOps platform that pays itself. Literally, I think the fastest payback we've had has been 2 months. So this isn't the kind of thing that's going to take you 5 years to get to pay back.
Michael, what are your thoughts? make an investment now or just improve what we got?
No, I think Fred's right on the money with this, and I alluded to this in some of our earlier discussion. It's spending more time on monitoring is creating more content. The challenge that we're facing is how do you consume that content? The sea of red problem is all about content. There's nothing in the sea of red that necessarily says that the quality of those individual events aren't necessarily good. There's just too many of them to consume in the traditional manner. As you know, as Fred's alluded to, this is a machine level problem, that it is something that requires that to do more than just having humans staring at a screen. And so focusing on things that get more information into that modality of consumption isn't going to help you. You really do need to bring the machine learning or the machine approach to things, the AIOps approach, in order to process that data, in order to allow you to consume that data, in order to allow you to act on that data. That's where the benefits are going to come out of.